Good afternoon. I'm Dan Cahill, your brief host for today. We're going to do a talk back on Beauty and the Beast. And with no further delay, I'm going to send it over to our founder and president, Norma Levy. If you are entering now, please do turn off your video and mute your microphone. And Norma, I'll leave it to you. Take it away, Norma.
Thank you so much. And hello there, everybody. My name is Norma Levy, and I'm the president and founder of New Plaza Cinema. Today, we're looking forward to a lively discussion about the 1947 classic French film, Beauty and the Beast. And I am so pleased to announce that this program is being sponsored by Janice Bogart, who is one of our great supporters. And now I'm delighted to introduce our host, the talented curator of New Plaza Cinema, Gary Palmucci.
Well, thank you very much, Norma. It's great to be back on the New Plaza Cinema Talkback circuit after the last 6 months of managing our big screen theater on West 86th Street. Thanks to everyone who visited us there. The theater is now on hiatus, as many of you may know, due to its absence of air conditioning. But we'll be announcing some plans and some dates in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. I really want to thank everyone here and those of us who are in far-flung corners of the globe here at the moment, but Max, Daniel, Stephen, Lori, Norma, Sean, Marianne, and our many guests for the great work they've done here over the past few months. Now, today's program was made possible, as Norma said, by one of our most loyal and generous supporters, Janice Bogart, whom many of you may recall from last year's Red Shoes Talkback, still available to watch on YouTube, in which Janice told one of the most remarkable anecdotes we've heard on this program about how she personally witnessed the filming of an on-location scene from the Red Shoes, excuse me, from high in a London theater balcony. We'll see what recollections Janice may have in store for us today. Coincidentally, Beauty and the Beast was arguably, along with Red Shoes, one of two gems that rekindled post-war American movie audiences' interest in foreign films. I first saw it myself about, in fact, exactly a half century ago on a PBS weekly classic foreign film series, I'm sure many of you recall, called Film Odyssey. And 2 decades later, in my years of working in independent film distribution, I was involved in preparing a new 35 millimeter film print, which was commissioned by San Francisco's legendary Castro Theater, Jean Cocteau being something of an icon in that neighborhood, in which sadly, portions of Janus Films' American film negative were damaged with something which some of us in the business know called vinegar syndrome, in which older pieces of film and negative and positive film stock become shrunken, damaged, deteriorated in some way, and are very difficult to print and get satisfactory results from. We did, but it was very imperfect. And it's really a pleasure to see this version that many of you, I hope, have seen today from the Criterion DVD and streaming release benefits of a restoration of the film between French and Luxembourg film archives in the early 2000s. I would go so far as to even call it not just a restoration, but a resurrection, including a unique opening credit sequence, which had not been seen in US editions till, I believe, 2003. Does that sound right, Max?
That does sound right, Gary. I just watched the Criterion edition last night, and that opening you mentioned came up, and I said, wait a minute, I didn't see this back in the 70s on PBS or at the Oriental Theater in Milwaukee. So yes, that is a pleasant surprise to us in the United States.
Right, we see Jean Marais and Josette Day kind of sitting in what looks like a grammar school classroom and getting up and scrawling their names on a chalkboard. Cocteau steps in and erases them. And then we even see a clapper boy, kicking off the opening scene. It's a beautiful, unique opening credit sequence. So great that it survived.
Very much ahead of its time, and something that would have been more commonplace in the 1960s and beyond. So What we're going to take a look at now is the original trailer, once again, that has been lovingly restored or available via the Criterion edition. This is 4 minutes, and what's unique is that it is narrated by the filmmaker Jean Cocteau. So a number of us are seeing this for the first time, and I also just want to remind people we are recording this program today. So just wanted to remind you of that. So with your permission, Gary, shall we thread up the projector and take a look at the original trailer?
On y va, as the French say.
Okay.
Pour ceux qui savent encore dormir debout, pour les grandes personnes qui n'ont pas perdu leur enfance, pour ceux qui croient que l'impossible est possible, pour tous ceux qui ont aimé l'éternel retour, j'ai tiré du conte célèbre de Madame le Prince de Beaumont ce film, La Belle et la Bête. Voici d'abord la Belle.
Belle, même le parquet veut devenir votre miroir.
Quant à la Bête,
Et cette bête parle le langage des hommes.
Oui, Avenant. Elle parle comme vous et moi.
Est-ce qu'elle marche à quatre pattes? Qu'est-ce qu'elle boit? Qu'est-ce qu'elle mange?
Il m'arrive de lui donner à boire.
est-ce un homme? Est-ce un monstre? Est-ce une bête? Non, je ne vous la montrerai pas.
Nous devons tuer cette bête. Et prendre ses richesses. Mais sais-tu ce que c'est qu'une puissance magique? Je ne crois pas aux puissances magiques.
Mon Dieu!
Ce film était bien difficile à faire. Avons-nous réussi? N'avons-nous pas réussi? Je vous le demande. De toute manière, un pareil film n'était possible que grâce à une équipe de premier ordre. Écoutez la musique de Georges Auric. Voici le nom de notre illustrateur, Christian Bérard. Notre décorateur, René Moulaert. Notre costumier, Marcel Escoffier. Notre chef opérateur, Henri Allecon. Où sommes-nous? À quelle époque? En quel pays? Ceux de Gustav Dorei ou de Vermeer de Delft? Reconnaissez les acteurs, mes amis, les vôtres.
Puisque tu te trouves si mal ici, pourquoi ne retournes-tu pas chez la bête?
Qu'est-ce qui se passe encore?
Mais pauvre sourde, pauvre aveugle, tu peux nous sauver tous de la ruine.
La Belle, vous l'avez déjà reconnue. Et vous avez aussi reconnu ces 3 personnages.
Nous irons avec Ludovic et nous tuerons cette épouvantable bête.
C'est grand dommage que cette bête ne réclame pas les garçons. Elle te dévorerait et elle mourrait empoisonnée.
Comte Gai,
Oh, il m'a frappé! Voyou, canaille!
Par les pattes. Tu veux que je te casse la gueule?
Laisse, Ludovic. Avenant me demandait un mariage.
Comte Triste, Comte d'amour.
Mes sœurs sont trop belles. Et elles ont les mains trop blanches.
Belle. Vous êtes la plus belle.
Belle, toujours belle. Peu importe, belle.
Belle, je l'ai vue, sa tête est atroce. Je sais que je suis très horrible.
Notre film est un hommage à la grande mythologie française des contes de fées. Nous espérons que vous viendrez tous le voir. Merci.
How generous to share the trailer information with his fellow artists behind the camera.
Really remarkable and very, very unusual.
Very unusual. It's not just me, but we have an art director, we have a composer, we have a cinematographer. Hitchcock usually didn't do that.
No.
But it's just aspects that very, very contemporary about the film. I like you, Gary, had first seen it on that PBS series 50 years ago, Film Odyssey, and then
yes, and for 26 weeks we saw that famous tracking shot on the opening scroll of that program of the Beast carrying Beauty after she has fainted at about the 35-minute mark in the film down that long corridor with the dozen or so human hands poking out of the wall with the candles and so forth. So every Friday we saw that for 6 months, and that's something that's imprinted in our cine memory.
Maybe before the end of the program, I can track down the original Variety review. It was this big, and it was from, I think it may have been from the Cannes Festival, where the film got a very bad reaction, and the critic just dismissed it, saying, "This is a tough sell in the United States."
Yeah. Now looking back at the Cannes lineup that year, the French film that won a prize was La Symphonie Pastorale, and not Beauty and the Beast, which certainly has not aged nearly as well. I saw it about 10 years ago, and that was one of those things best left to hindsight, to posterity, I guess.
Cocteau was not a prolific filmmaker, Gary, but
six feature films. But if you could somehow, the converse of that is that his influence is just enormous, vast, still feeling it across many different disciplines and sensibilities. I think music, literature, cinema, of course, special effects. And really only 3 of the films are really seen widely today. Beauty and the Beast, Orpheus, the follow-up to this, and his first feature made around 1930, The Blood of a Poet, which is kind of puts him at that time in the same category as Buñuel and Dali, making these kind of wacky, surrealist, and there are many touches of that in Beauty and the Beast as well, but kind of in a different era of movie history, film, still figuring things out as filmmakers went along year by year.
And also Les Enfants Terribles.
Les Enfants Terribles, I believe he wrote. That was directed by our friend Jean-Pierre Melville of Le Samurai fame. Probably was very close supervision by Cocteau, I would imagine, but it was an unusual credit for Melville, who worked mostly in the gangster and noir genre, but a very important one for him early in his career.
And like Orpheus, that collaboration was not positively received in Paris. It sometimes takes decades for the public and for the critics to catch up with these films, especially in the native countries. The look of the film is quite extraordinary, and when you study Beauty and the Beast, it is sort of a minimalist design in many ways. And I know Dan is going to be talking so much more about the visual look when we introduce him in just a little while.
As usual, he did his homework. He let us know early in the week.
Yes, exactly. And I know Dan will probably have a lot to say, because so much of these sets, and I know this was done for budgetary reasons, but it's the mother of invention. In a film budget, poverty is the mother of genius in many cases, where you had a lot of black backgrounds, but you had props and objects in front of those black backgrounds, almost as if it was a play. And the acting styles certainly are theatrical, deliberately theatrical, I think, to draw attention to the make-believe fairy tale narrative.
Well, yeah, we're going to see what was going on with the candles and the necklaces and so forth. And the cinematographer apparently was a very young guy who Cocteau hired to shoot the film, Henri Allecon, who 40 years later turned up as the cinematographer on Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire in 1987, and was given the New York Film Critics Award for Best Cinematography. And as someone noted on the night of the award presentation, was out partying later than anybody else who was given any awards or journalist present at that evening. Quite a remarkable character, apparently, with a great group of credits also.
And I know we'll be learning more about the cinematography aspects in just a little while. There's lines of dialogue, which of course I'm dealing with the English translations here, that stood out for me when I revisited the film just the other day. All of them from La Bête, where he says, "I have a good heart, but I am a monster." He says, "You stroke me the way one strokes an animal." That's a fabulous line. And then in a particularly poignant line, I think you would only see in a European film, because it's potentially a horrific scene, when La Bête shows up at Belle's door at night, having just presumably devoured an animal, and he has blood on him, looking hideous and terrifying. He says very sweetly, "Pardon me for being a beast." And that just speaks so much about the power and the eloquence of the film and its contradictions.
Right, and perhaps the line that resonates most to me, the one that sort of kickstarts the whole narrative, which she says to her dad, "Bring me a rose," and that's kind of the beginning of the whole set.
Of all the troubles, absolutely. And I hope Dan won't be angry. I hope I'm not getting ahead of him here, but I know that the look of the film, Cocteau was very much wanting to be a look that would be inspired by painters, whether it was the Flemish painters such as Vermeer, also as in the trailer.
In the trailer, yeah.
Acknowledges that. And once again, where do we see that in a coming attractions preview, where they actually acknowledge the artistic inspiration for a film?
Actually, Orson Welles did that in the Citizen Kane credits.
Where he acknowledged influences.
Yes, no, in the credits to Citizen Kane at the end, he shows a movie camera and mentions, oh God, what's his name? Who's the DP?
Greg Toland.
Greg Toland.
Thank you. All right.
No, thank you. That's great, Dan. Thank you so much. We're all getting ready for the adventure here today. Cocteau, it was a weird, as you say, a weird filmography there. He did have Blood of a Poet that came out in 1930, which caused a bit of a scandal, because the avant-gardists, there was a little bit of competition between that film and also Buñuel and Dallé's L'Âge d'Or, which had encountered all these problems, and Blood of a Poet is going to encounter problems in terms of censorship from the Paris police, and it's going to take a while to open there. And Cocteau, as a playwright, is going to be no stranger to controversy and censorship, especially once the Vichy years take over. But even before then, he will encounter problems with certain plays. But Beauty and the Beast, I don't recall encountering too much controversy, at least.
A huge hit in France after the war. I think over 4 million admissions, which I think in those days was, means probably practically every adult in the country saw it or something in a cinema.
Yeah, and it's been said that he at one point was the youngest poet laureate, or the youngest poet in France. And they credited him in one biography of being the first French writer to pick up a film camera. That sounds like a bit of an exaggeration, but certainly one who was really pursuing cinema, or understanding the cinematic equivalent of literature and poetry on the screen. Although after the whole Blood of a Poet thing, there was talk that Cocteau, he had indicated he was going to be abandoning the cinema for a while, or at least presumably forever, to pursue theater. But of course, he ended up returning.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, there have been other fairy tales that have been made into very compelling films. That there's something kind of primal about the emotions in this film, and the inevitable narrative drive. And I guess most fairy tales have to have happy endings of one sort or another. But one almost feels like some of the characters, those two deliciously evil sisters, were kind of a little disappointed at the end that they don't get theirs, in some spectacular fashion, like Jean Marais, his human character does. Just a real sense of everything is at stake emotionally for these characters, and then a weird plot similarity to the Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice as well, where a bunch of ships destroyed at sea and their goods being destroyed triggers the bankruptcy of one of the main characters, and that's kind of the fulcrum of the plot as well. I don't know the original date of publication of the story. Maybe one of you guys does. Merchant of Venice was obviously at the very end of the 16th century, but a weird coincidence.
I had forgotten there was that financial incentive to that got the whole narrative moving forward. And yet there's tremendous melancholy at the end. I mean, the beast technically dies, and yes, Jean Marais appears. And Gary, I know I'm probably paraphrasing here, but wasn't there a famous quote from Greta Garbo when she saw the film? And
that's right. She allegedly said, you know, she wailed in the theater and said, you know, bring me back my beast. That was
exactly. There was a sense of heartbreak there.
And I have a feeling Bernardo Bertolucci was making a reference in Last Tango in Paris, of all the things to reference with this movie. But when Maria Schneider at one point encounters Marlon Brando in their apartment, and she says, "Allo monstre," and we, of course, we hear "Allo monstre" or something monstre a number of times in this film, and there was an echo there for me, at least.
And also the music by Georges Auric is very, very beautiful. And I've often said in the past that the European composers usually were given more time and respect than their American counterparts to actually spend some time on a score. And it's so haunting. And
it's almost like another character in the film.
It is
indispensable.
And Auric and Cocteau went back quite a ways to collaborations they did with Picasso and Arthur Honegger and so many others in theatrical productions in France. And they were part of Les Six, that musical movement in the early 1920s. And Auric is going to go on to a very distinguished film composing career for years to come.
Yes, for sure. And, you know, and Orpheus and many other important French films.
Well, I would be very interested in hearing what our erstwhile cinematography expert, Daniel Cahill, has to say. Once again, Dan, I do not envy your task today because there's a lot to talk about in terms of the look of La Belle et la Bête. Welcome,
I had
Dan.
fun doing it, so don't think I was tortured in any way.
Good.
I'm gonna put up my screen, my PowerPoint here. It will take me a moment to just size everything appropriately. Oh gosh. All right, I'm just gonna move into the slideshow. There we go. So here is the creative title. And those of you who don't know, this is Monsieur Cocteau displaying his wonderful penmanship in chalk. And he was the one doing all the titles on the screen. Very clever and undone prior to that. So I'm gonna start right in on one of the scenes of the film. This is in the courtyard of the farmhouse where Belle and her family live. And now we are going to move ahead, 51 years to what it looked like in the 1990s when making of film was done. This was a real farmhouse which suited all of their needs. This is the aforementioned Henri Allecon, who was the director of photography on the film. And he is one of the legendary French cinematographers of the 20th century. He and the other Henri Deca did a lot of work with the New Wave people and had long and very productive careers. I want to talk for a while about the design of the exteriors in the film, which were not exteriors. This, as you can probably see, is a studio shot of Belle's father on his way to the Beast's castle. Just make note, and this will be a stylistic theme we're going to see in the next few slides, that the deep background is lighter in tone, which suggests depth and richness in the background. Here we have the same character approaching the Beast's castle after the branches of the trees have parted. And once again, the background is lighter. It's almost a suggestion that we're looking through mist. Another scene, I think this is a studio design, although as we'll see soon, the architecture in the rear of the frame is real. But I think this was a studio design. And once again, the background is light in tone. Where does this come from? Well, here's one of my favorite people mentioned by Cocteau in his voiceover on the trailer. This is Gustav Dorei, who is known chiefly as an illustrator and engraver. And he was a 19th century man. It's worth noting. He died in 1883 and never knew cinema, but his influence was profound, as we'll see in a second or so. This is one of his illustrations for a Perrault fairy tale. And you'll note when we move to the top half of the frame, once again, the background is very light in tone. This is a forest scene designed by Dorei. And now we're going to see something slightly off the track, folks, but one of my favorite films. You'll recognize on the left, Robert Armstrong. On the right, across a chasm, is Bruce Cabot. Yes, folks, this is the original King Kong. And note the lightness of the background in a jungle on a mysterious island. It fits perfectly.
Frequently double billed by revival houses, Dan, in the 70s and 80s.
Really? That's
Yeah.
Great to know. Thank you. So now we're back with Cocteau, and this beast, I tell you, he would be very comfortable in the mid-50s, 1950s, because he was really keen on labor-saving devices. Note how the guest's shadow will open the door. No one ever has to open a door here. Similarly, no one ever has to hold a match up to light a candle. Now, this is a fascinating effect, and this is the way the effect begins with the candles mostly extinguished, and then they seem to burst into flame. Well, the way they did this was to film it beginning with the candles on fire, and then a large fan off screen would blow them out. And then they would simply print that film backwards. So it looks like they burst into flame. It's so simple, you almost want to weep, but hey, it works. It's timeless. Here we are just using that corridor of sconces so beautifully as a frame for almost anything. It's probably everybody's best remembered effect from the film, and it really works. I love the fact that it doesn't really have to be real, because these handsome young men holding the sconces clearly don't have to be there all the time, because they can let it float and point. Very, very smart, I thought. I just want to note something. The way characters react to the sconces, in this shot and several others, the arms holding the sconces will hold them out closer to someone. And I don't think it's meant to be menacing. I think it's meant to say, here's more light for you. Once again, labor-saving devices. This stuff, the eyes in the statues. Now, we've seen a lot of this in cheap horror films, the eyes in the painting that follow you around the room. It's a wonderful effect. But what's interesting is that none of the people who are being observed, specifically Belle and her father, ever seem to realize it or react to it. It's just an element in the room, but they don't seem to know what's going on. The ultimate labor-saving device, always having a hand ready to pour your wine, and a very deep pour it is, as we would say at the local wine bar today. This is the extension of the shot that Gary just referenced, where the beast carries Belle down the corridor where the candelabras are, and then in the same shot, walks up a stair. And I just love the look of this last frame of the shot. Clearly, they have added fog to the scene so that the beams of light are more clearly highlighted. Okay, this bizarre statuary that is used as a scene twice in the film is actually real. It's at a park in a chateau called Raray, which is still there. Here we see a dramatic scene from the film, and I love this next shot. This is a production still, and by gosh, they're doing the same thing then that they do today. You've got an assistant holding a mic boom over the actors to record their sound, and because they were outdoors, there's even a windscreen covering the mic so it doesn't get a rustling sound. I do want you to make note of the antlers in the center of the frame, And this is what that same statue looked like 50 years later. I don't know if it was vandalism, weather, but the antlers didn't hold up too terribly well. Mirrors have always had magical properties in all of human folklore, and Cocteau realizes that and exploits them. Here we're watching the beast enter a frame through a mirror, and the mirrors clearly are part of the storytelling device throughout the film. Here is the very first close-up we see of him early in the film. And it's worth noting that with all sorts of elaborate makeup like this over the history of films, it takes forever to put it on. It took 5 hours to lay it upon Jean Marais' face and supposedly 7 hours to remove it, which is a more delicate task. You clearly don't want to damage the actor's skin. I just love this shot for all the textures that are contained within it. We have the curtains, we have the fur of the beast, the fur of the blanket, we have the foliage in the background, we have the beast's costume. Once again, very imaginatively executed. Here is one of the final shots of the film. This is a transformation scene. And this was not new. Hollywood had done this before with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and even with Lon Chaney Jr. as the poor Lawrence Talbot turning into the Wolfman earlier in the 40s. But here he is being returned to his human, pretty self before he and Belle literally fly off to be to join each other happily ever after, as the phrase goes. Not a terribly sophisticated effect. It's basically double printed in an optical printer, but it's lovely and a good way to end the film. And that's how I'm going to end my segment today.
Dan, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I particularly loved the King Kong reference, and of course, Gary's addition to the...
I'll sneak one in whenever I can. So,
well, and of course, we remember the last line of King Kong, right? "'Twas beauty killed the beast." That was the...
There you have it.
Yeah.
There you have it. Henri Allecon, the cinematographer, was interviewed, and you see this on the Criterion disc, when there was a retrospective restoration in the mid-90s. He was interviewed on television in Luxembourg. And he mentioned that beautiful sequence early on when the father goes to the beast's mansion estate, and how it had taken something like a day and a half to prepare and rehearse that sequence. And Cocteau, perhaps he was just burned out or exhausted, he said to Allecon and the assistant director, René Clément, who will become a major filmmaker, Forbidden Games and Purple Noon, he said, you guys handle this. And apparently that scene was directed in Cocteau's absence. Did you hear that as well, Daniel?
Yes, yes. And it was one long take of the father entering along the corridor with the candles coming on. And they shot that one long take backwards, with the father walking backwards down the corridor as the candles went out in the original footage.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
You know, I worship in-camera effects, as everyone knows. They're probably
Yes.
tired of hearing me saying that. And I think that the one that really stood out for me was when La Belle offers the pearl necklace to one of her awful sisters. Tell us what happens next, Dan.
Well, there is a cut between her handing it out of the frame, and then we cut to the sister taking something in from the same frame line, and it turns out to be this old rope that she was not happy with, and she drops it on the ground. And it's so simple. I mean, a kid could do it, and kids are probably doing it now with all their home video equipment, but it is interesting that in one of the interviews on the Criterion disc, they talked about how Cocteau did not care for laboratory special effects, things that were overly elaborate, and he much preferred something that could be done practically in front of the camera, almost like a magic trick unfolding. So that may have been his background, being very theatrical.
Sleight of hand 101, distracting your attention basically with this time with the use of the editor's bench.
Indeed. And some effects, I thought I had a slide for it, but it must have disappeared somehow, of the corridor with the curtains blowing in as
Beautiful.
Belle walks towards the camera. It's
but
hypnotic.
she's not technically walking. She's sort of moving almost on wheels down.
Yeah, she's gliding.
Gliding, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yes, yes.
Using slow motion.
I think that was part of it. So anyway, they used the full battery of effects on this thing.
And I know someone in the chat section indicated that a movie, I'm not familiar with it, Poto alludes to Cocteau's scenes. I'm not sure, but I know certainly there have been references to Beauty and the Beast, and I'm thinking Roman Polanski's Repulsion, some of the nightmare scenes where hands are emerging from the walls, and I even think there might be candles. It's been so long time since I've seen that, and of course the big musical remake of Phantom of the Opera by Joel Schumacher.
I suspect that's what the gentleman is referring to, or a lady.
Oh, Phantom of the Opera. Oh, thank you. Yeah, because I said I don't recall a film called Poto, Phantom of the Opera. Absolutely.
Well, there's Poto and Cabengo by Jean-Luc Godard's sometime collaborator. There's Jean-Pierre Gorin, right?
Exactly. So, but you're right. That was a very expensive homage to Beauty and the Beast. We mentioning some of the performances here. I remember back in the late 70s, there was an ill-fated TV version. I think it was George C. Scott and Trish Vanderveer. I think that was the version that was on. And the next day I saw a dance teacher, a man from England, who was just shaking his head, having watched part of it on TV. He said, all I could hear was, La Belle, La Belle. And it's worth mentioning Jean Marais, who his work and relationship with Cocteau went back to the 1930s. He had appeared in a not successful production of Cocteau's Knights of the Round Table, in which he played Galahad. That was in late 1937, but Cocteau was able to rebound from the failure with Les Parents Terribles. And they remain together and are going to work together in, I mean, certainly their relationship was an open secret. No one seemed to hold it against them. And because they were so—
It was France. We don't have these biases, you know?
True. And I think what's particularly interesting, before June of 1941, before Germany invaded the USSR, there was some liberalization in terms of they were tolerating things in Paris more, because the attitude being, well, it's Paris and the German soldiers need to relax a little. So they were not cracking down, say, on some of the nightclub work and artists and homosexuality as they would after June. But even so, Marais and Cocteau were certainly very well known and respected and not interfered with too much. There was one account that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, before we leave Jean Marais, I just wanted to remind people, in case they happen to remember the film, it's one of my favorites. I know it's not one of yours, Max, but his last film was Bertolucci's Stealing Beauty, which takes place in the countryside in Tuscany, and he plays a wise old man in the film. And
wow, I forgot all about
that. I had forgotten that too, Dan. You forced me to reappraise that picture. I'm gonna have to take another look at it.
I really like it, but that's maybe because the visuals are so gorgeous in it. I don't know.
Well, there was some rivalry there because Marais became such a big star in France, and Cocteau was getting a little jealous of all the women who were just worshiping him. That apparently he made sure when they made Orpheus together that Marais would be outfitted with a very awful wife in the film. So that was one account, but an incredibly powerful collaboration. And do any of the other actors jump out at anyone from other films of that era?
Well, Josette Day had a very brief career. She retired in 1950, apparently, but that's an incandescent performance as La Belle.
It really is. And once again, they are deliberately going for a more fantastic style of acting that even by 1940s commercial standards would have be seen as very theatrical, but it totally fits the mood and the look and the feel of the picture.
And her close-ups are just so, let's use that word again, incandescent.
Incandescent, absolutely. And I was surprised in the trailer, not having seen it until the rest of us did. I wasn't sure if they were going to not show La Bête just for commercial, like it was going to be the Charles Laughton Hunchback of Notre Dame or Elephant Man syndrome, where don't show the beast, we don't want to scare off ticket buyers. But they did at the very end.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we should ask Janice if she has an anecdote, comparable to her red shoes.
I am going to actually.
I doubt if she was on the set, but I'm sure she will have some memories for us.
Well, once again, we are so delighted and thrilled to have Janice Bogard having promoted and funded today's event. So I've asked Janice to join our discussion. You can turn on your video anytime. Janice, we would love to hear your thoughts. And thank you again, once again, for being so generous to New Plaza Cinema.
Voila.
It was a joy to be able to do it. I thank you all. And Gary and everybody, thank you for answering the questions before I asked them, because you answered everything I needed to know about the making of this film. It was so fabulous. I saw it when it first came out in London, so it must have been somewhere in the 40s, I don't know. But it remained in my mind forever. I cannot ever get rid of the visuals of the arms holding the candelabra. It was just magical. That the horse with the sparkles in his mane, everything was magic. And actually, there is a lead-in at the beginning of the film where we are told that we should be sure to view this through the eyes of a child. I thought that was a bit unnecessary because obviously it's a fairy story and we are all children watching a fairy story. However, that was very small and unimportant. The music also I thought was fabulous because it telegraphed everything that was going to happen. When the father was lost in the dark in the forest, can you hear me all right? My voice is a bit
yes,
strange.
yes,
we can hear you perfectly, Janice.
What did I read? But the father is lost in the forest along with lots of dry ice and mist. And then I think the music suddenly comes up very quickly, and I called it, this is music to get lost by. That this is something very theatrical, and yes, I know he's going to get lost now. Thank you for telling me. And the trumpets were used every time La Bête emerged and spoke, and of course violins for Belle. My other thought was, well, this is a story about goodness and honesty and generosity. Belle is not very smart, and maybe that's part of her charm. She's very beautiful, but who in heaven's name would leave the gold key on the table just like that, waiting for someone to steal it? Come on, guys.
The thought had crossed my mind. I have Janice. I was thinking about that last night.
I can answer your question, Janice. The person who left the key there was the screenwriter. Okay?
No kidding.
Yeah, that answers almost every question here.
Well, it really does, because he left the magic glove there too.
Yeah, of
I was
course.
a bit worried about that. But anyway, fortunately, it all worked out very nicely. But the thing is that she was so honest. She'd been living in a house filled with thieves and murderers, but she was untouched. She understood them, and she forgave them, and she actually loved them. She loved those horrible sisters. She thought they were just fine. And she wanted to be there with them. Strange lady. But what did I put here? The truth. Oh, yes. Max, you mentioned that he said, you treat me like an animal. And she, instead of saying, well, you are an animal, She just looked sweetly at him, and she reached out her hand and she played with his ears the way one does play with an animal's ears. And I thought, oh, doggy, nice doggy. It was very sweet, very, very tender, and she was very lovely. The only time when he really appears to be a beast is when at the beginning, he sees a deer under the trees, and he clearly is agitated and he wants to run after the deer and eat it. And he manages, with great difficulty, it would appear, to control himself. And so, and I anyway, breathed a breath of relief and said, oh my God, it's not going to come in covered in blood. They keep that for later. And that was all right. Of course, in her boudoir, I love the fabrics, all that net blowing, all that everything is what we used to call ninong, and that's yards and yards of fabric in her dresses. How she could carry all that satin, it must have weighed a ton, but she carried it off beautifully, and the dresses were magnificent and beautiful and appropriate to the story. I loved them. And everybody's costumes were wonderful. That was lovely. I love fairy stories so much. And this, her reward, oh yes. She is rewarded ultimately by being given a very beautiful young man of undetermined sexuality and a great hairdresser.
Were you, like others, disappointed when the beast became Marais at the end? Was that a disappointment? Did you miss him as well?
Well, I loved him as a beast, and I felt, as Garbo did, où est mon bête, or ma bête, excuse me, that he was such a teddy bear. He should stay that way. But of course, they had to make it very beautiful, and the prince is very princely and appropriately.
If you note, Marais' human character throughout the film is very bland. I mean, he's not particularly interesting, never says or does anything. He's got a great physique when he's chopping wood, but you know, there's not much there for us to be coveting. The beast is far more interesting, and we want to know his history.
He is. But then, of course, because, as I say, Mel is not very bright, and she's probably very happy with this young man who isn't very bright either.
And she's marrying the wealth that her two sisters have coveted throughout the story.
Isn't that?
She's the one who makes off with the rich, handsome prince. So.
Yes, but what happens to her brother? Did they leave him in Aladdin's cave there? Or, I mean.
That's Ludovico. We don't see what happens to him.
Ludovico, yes.
We see him appalled and terrified in close up, and that's pretty much it.
And that's it. So he's left there among all those pearls.
It certainly was very sad when those two awful sisters are manipulating La Belle into staying and not going back because they have this scheme. And then as soon as she agrees to stay, then suddenly they're back to being their horrible selves again.
It is true. They were the ugly sisters.
Right, exactly. That carrying over those characters. And Janice, thank you so much for emphasizing the musical instruments used at certain times. That's so important in our getting more of an understanding of the Auric score and its impact.
It's important.
You know.
Very much. Thank you, Matt.
Well, thank you, Janice. The wonderful thoughts. And I know we already have people who are interested in asking questions.
I would like to point out my partner, Janet Gornick, just surprised me and leapt in with a question. Was The Shape of Water sort of a remake?
By Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Gary?
I have none. I'm having a hard time conjuring it up. But
certain aspects of it, certainly.
Yeah. Well, observe, Janet. If you want to chime in and say something more, please feel free on the Q&A.
Before we get to more questions, I just want to do a quick mention here. Of course, we'll be calling on people and unmuting them. On the 27th of July, that will be the next New Plaza Cinema online presentation. We are honoring a wonderful filmmaker who passed away earlier this year, Peter Bogdanovich, who, of course, we discussed his last picture show very early on in our Sunday talkbacks. And I will be discussing his life and career, the director of not only the last picture show and What's Up, Doc, but a film that will be our next talk back or future in following this presentation, Paper Moon. And I hope to dispel the myth that it was all downhill after that. There were some wonderful films that were not appreciated at the time that deserve greater comment that he made.
Still being rediscovered.
That are still being rediscovered, exactly. Films such as Daisy Miller and even Nickelodeon and a very maligned musical At Long Last Love and others. And Bogdanovich not only was an outstanding filmmaker, but a fantastic writer and historian and chronicler of Hollywood history as well. So please go to newplazacinema.org for more information about the online presentation on the 27th. And then we hope to see you also at the subsequent talk back. It'll be very, very exciting stuff. So now I can be—
We have a question, raised hand from Michael.
From Michael. Let's ask Michael to unmute and also to start his video if he would like. Go right ahead, Michael. Anytime you're ready.
Yes, I wanted to make a comment
to
share. I think you might find this interesting. You probably know the singer-songwriter Stevie Nicks of Fleetwood Mac.
Could you repeat, please?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Oh, that's better.
Okay, you probably know the singer-songwriter Stevie Nicks.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, she saw the movie, I think back in the 80s. You can look it up. But she was so taken with it, she wrote a song. It's the closing song on her sophomore album, The Wild Heart. And I wanted to mention that because I was just really, when I heard it, I thought, who else in my lifetime would have thought to have done that? I said, I bet she saw the movie. And sure enough, I read later that she had seen the movie, and that led her, that was the inspiration for the song Beauty and the Beast.
Oh dear, I think, Michael, I think we may have lost you. I'm going to ask you to.
Your mic is still indicated as being on.
Okay.
But you know, that's actually a Beauty and the Beast story also. Well, I'm glad I could share those comments. I love the movie.
Thank you so much, Michael. And it certainly illustrates how this is a film that transcends and transforms from generation to generation and affects people decades after its release.
Yeah, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Beauty and the Beast story also, Quasimodo and Esmeralda.
It's definitely in that vein, and I was definitely reminded of it during the trailer when I was wondering, are they going to show the Beast or not, just like the Hunchback. But great analogy with that. Thank you, Michael. Sure. Anyone else? My goodness, we have a kind of a shy crowd today, but please don't be shy.
You have your seat down. Okay, I'm going to use my reward.
All right. Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. We'd love to hear. In terms of okay, we have Patricia. We'll go ahead and welcome Patricia to our discussion. Please begin. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Hi. So I just have a plot question. The Beast tells Beauty, Belle, don't look into my eyes. And in the end, when she looks into his eyes, that's when he becomes the handsome prince. So just wondering, within the plot, like, why was he saying, don't look into my eyes?
I was wondering that myself, and I wish I had paid attention after that to, is there no point after that she certainly must have looked into his eyes at some point in the narrative, or am I imagining that? I wish I had been paying closer attention to that.
He is frequently positioned either behind her or over her shoulder or at her side. It's rare. I don't remember that they ever are facing each other in a traditional two-person dialogue scene.
Until perhaps the final encounter when he's been transformed.
Exactly, right. Yeah.
But why does he tell her not to look into his eyes?
Is it because he feels he's so hideous? Does he feel that he might somehow be contaminated or affected by his quote unquote ugliness? That was my initial response, but that was my feeling, but I don't know if anybody else agrees or not.
We were lamenting the lack of, suitable punishment for the two sisters, but of course, thinking back on it, when each one of them looks into the mirror at the end, they certainly get a full dose from that, particularly the second sister.
Right.
But it was, I'm only speculating that some of it came from self-loathing and fear that he wanted her to love him and was afraid that would be impossible if she really looked him in the eye or looked in his eye.
Okay, that makes sense to me too.
That's my thoughts. Thank you, Patricia.
It's good, yeah.
Thank you so much. Anyone else before we move on? Any other thoughts, Janice or Dan or Gary, about the film and its impact and why it has endured so much? I think we get a general sense of its power and its beauty. We have we have Rena who has something to say. So Rena, you can turn on your video if you so desire. We'd love to hear your thoughts or questions.
Well, I put it in the chat, but I was just wondering about the source material for Beauty and the Beast and for the film. Much later iterations, we have a cartoon that has the anthropomorphic candelabras and teapots, and of course the musical then picks up on those. But I'm wondering if they were looking back to this film or if they were looking back to an earlier oral source, or do we know?
Well, first of all, I apologize. I forgot to mention that the rule today is there was never a Disney cartoon called Beauty and the Beast. That never existed. This is the only Beauty and the Beast. But I do think clearly they were inspired by, because they had the teacups and the candles singing and things, that they would have had to have seen this film and based some of the content, the visual content on it. That's just my thoughts. I don't know much about the source material otherwise, though. I don't know if any of you gentlemen or
I once met one of the musical composers. I think his name is Steven Schwartz, and he was quite a film buff, as I recall. So I think that's like one you can't imagine there wouldn't be some influence there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rena. And our president, Norma Levy, has a question. Norma, and if you'd like to start your video, please go right ahead. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's picking up on what Rena had said, and you take a look at the musical Beauty and the Beast coming from Disney, and it's almost, it says something about the transition of a what is it, about a 50 or 60 or 70 year period for how we see fairy tales. The old fairy tales, the old grim fairy tales, had a lot of evil and nastiness in them. And by the time Beauty and the Beast is made, you've got something that's light and fluffy and happy, and mice are singing around the table, and it is a difference in an era about how we present things, and particularly things that have where children are involved, or that are allegedly out of a fairy tale.
I was having trouble keeping a straight face, Norma, because I had a flashback when you mentioned the film that never existed, the Disney production. I do remember the screenwriter, the woman screenwriter for that, when it came out, was saying, we were determined to make her a feminist, Beauty. We had to make her more of, I fought to make her a feminist. This is a different kind of story, but they were definitely trying a different approach to that fairy tale story. But thank you for that historical backgrounder. Yes, we have Harry Shulman. I'm going to ask him to unmute and go right ahead.
Hello, gentlemen. Another wonderful session. Hi, guys.
Gary.
I had never seen this film, and I was taken aback. I just thought it was brilliantly executed, just visually breathtaking. I'm curious, in the course of cinema history, I was blown away by the slow motion scene when Belle is walking down the corridor. And I'm curious, where in the history of film was slow motion used before that? Was that a new technique at that time in the mid-40s, or had it been used much before that?
Great question, Barry. Slow motion, we definitely see that being used in the 1920s. There's the first time I ever saw it, I mean, I wasn't around in the 20s, a lot of people think I was, but I remember Buster Keaton made a comedy in 1926 or 7 called College, where they're throwing him up in the air in a blanket, or he has an umbrella, and when he comes to the ground in slow motion. So there was some experimentation going on in silent film. In 1932, Ruben Mamoulian had a musical called Love Me Tonight, where slow motion was used there as well, but it wasn't used often. Gentlemen, and Denise, maybe you might have also recalled.
One thing about the silent era is that from time to time, the filmmakers really loved to tinker with the speed of the recording of the film. And they would, in a chase scene, they would do the opposite, film it in fast motion. I won't explain the technology. It's all backwards to everybody. But you know, if you think of a Keystone Cops chase scene, you know, they're all running at 3 times their normal speed. And I think part of that was due to the fact that they had no sound. So they could play around with the visuals as much as they wanted and didn't have to worry about, oh, do we have to slow down the dialogue for slow motion? I don't know. But it was kind of an experimental era for the pictorial qualities of films.
I think people that's great, Dan. And I think people in general were, the studios at least, were a little nervous about tinkering with that sort of thing. One of the few other examples from the 1930s, there was an experimental Hecht MacArthur film called Crime Without Passion that came out in 1934, a real
Blood Rains.
Exactly, and there's an extraordinary Slavko Vorkapich pre-title sequence in which someone is shot and falls down in slow motion. And that was 1934. So they've been tinkering, but this certainly was one of the earliest examples where it was used so beautifully.
And it was used, as you say, beautifully, and it was so perfect for that scene. It just made sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Barry.
So much. And I don't know if we have any other questions at this time, but what I'm going to do is perhaps if, let's see, Norma, would you have anything you'd like to say? We want, of course, thank Janice again, but is there any closing comments you'd like before we adjourn?
Yes, no, I just really want to thank Janice, who's been just a wonderful follower and lover of New Plaza Cinema since the beginning, basically. And she obviously loves film and has such great observations about it. She's really a treasure. And you know, if anybody else would like to sponsor a film, obviously, we'd love to have you. But we'd love to have you anyway, whether you sponsor a film or not.
Good.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And Gary, it's great to see you again. And
It's great to be back.
And
I'll be joining you in 2 weeks from somewhere in Oregon there when we do the next talk back.
All right, make sure, Gary, while you're there, make sure you say Oregon, not Oregon.
Okay.
All right.
Or I might be gone. I might be gone from the premises if I don't pronounce it.
Could be.
It'll be Paper Moon by Peter Bogdanovich, and of course, the online lecture on him will be Wednesday the 27th. Visit www.newplazacinema.org. We look forward to seeing you all. Thank you, Janice and Norma and Gary.
All right. Good night. Good night, everyone.
Have a great week, everybody. Take care now.